Hi everyone, my name is Pulkit Malhotra. I'm one of the current AP medical students, and during my professional development time, had the pleasure of spending 4 weeks under Mr. Abdul at Nuffield Healthcare Centre in Derby. And I did this as the module called Private Healthcare SSM, and it was a student-selected module that allowed me to observe clinics, theatres, and sit with the admin teams and organisers of a hospital. In the real presentation, I wanted to understand what people's initial thoughts were around the word private healthcare, which has quite a lot of attached stigma and perhaps different thoughts. Um, so the words I often got were wealthy, um, very exclusive, and inaccessible. And there was this whole perception that overall private healthcare wasn't a beneficial thing for the NHS and England as a whole. I found some data to start off this presentation, and what it shows is the British population are now spending as much as Americans on out-of-pocket healthcare spending. So America is made into this horrible dystopian country where private healthcare exists and it's brilliant for those involved in providing that healthcare, but not so brilliant for those on the receiving end of it. And well, let me tell you, as a share of GDP, the UK over the last 30 years has now crept up to join the US. And that's a sign that private healthcare is becoming more common. There's probably multiple causes for it, i.e., longer waiting times at NHS, better services, or perhaps people want the flexibility to choose their doctor. And there's multiple components that go into it from a patient's perspective. And the other thing I was looking for is trying to demystify the aspect that the private healthcare is only for the exclusively wealthy. If you look, this graph shows, the second graph, that household spending has doubled in the last decade amongst the poorest fifth and the wealthiest fifth. And now they spend as much as the wealthiest fifth in relative terms of their income. One potential reason I thought of this was that those in the poorest fifth of households in the UK are often doing hour by hour paid jobs or manual labor work. And if they have achieved or attained a physical injury, they cannot wait 18 months on the NHS to get that fixed. So often it means going to the health insurance or paying out of pocket to achieve that faster service provision. So now I'm formally starting the introduction to the presentation. As I said, I spent this month under Mr. Abdul and met some amazing people. The UK provides healthcare via the NHS, which is a state-driven service funded for by taxpayer income. And private healthcare is a subspecialty, essentially, in my mind, because it is very similar in many ways and quite different in other ways. So the aim of this module was not necessarily to become a private practitioner. It was to learn about how does a hospital function? How does the delivery of a service happen? Service provision in the UK is a very big industry, and wanting to understand more about that is very important to me as a future medical professional who might want to enterprise into various different skills and broaden my education. So I interact with many, many departments across Nuffield, from patient services, upon which there is a recording with Michelle Scadden, who is the manager, alongside marketing and GP liaison, in which I helped and discussed about how Nuffield actually gets its clients, which is very important because a business cannot run without its clients. The ward team, I spent some time with them and observed the rooms, the healthcare provision, going from recovery and from theatre into the ward. And I met the theatre staff, and Donna was fantastic. She took really good care of me and took me around. And there was inpatient bookings, personal assistants to hospital directors, and learning about how the hospital gets repaired and things and the processes to achieve higher standards, i.e., different machines for surgeries or different facilities. particularly relevant as a future doctor was practice privileges. I sort of had the conception that the minute one becomes a consultant, that's automatically you find a private practice because it's really, people are waiting and there is a need and desire for it. However, earning practice privileges showed me that it's not so easy. There is probably a long queue of consultants waiting to work at these types of hospitals. And the hospital, of course, Nuffield as a business, has to prioritize their profits and maximize what they can with limited facilities. So I got the privilege of looking through an application and understanding what kind of um, accolades would be needed to work at a place like Nuffield, and it was phenomenal. And it really inspired me to want to work harder to achieve a better standard of education, better um, experience, and more skills to provide that extra USP. So a place like Nuffield or Spire or other private hospitals would want to onboard a consultant like me in the future. I sat with the finance team, learnt about how payroll is done for the consultants, information governance meetings to see what is being done on the admin aspect, pre-op assessment and outpatient clinics and departments, which was fantastic because I saw the patient journey from start to finish. And I really enjoyed that. And I got to see some amazing clinics under Mr. Abdul, and it really, really appreciated his expertise and his willingness to teach me alongside a very, very busy clinic. And a little something, alongside GP liaison and marketing teams, I sat with one of their staff members and we did a post on LinkedIn because I was exploring hashtags, tagging people, and wanting to get involved. And I got a little comment from Alison Bain, who is the healthcare systems director, welcoming me to Derby Nuffield, which was a fantastic response. And I heard later on, a couple of weeks later, that learning the hashtags, tagging, and optimizing LinkedIn has actually added 10, 15 new followers. And of course, that expands outreach. So hopefully, continuation of this will mean a broader network reach for Nuffield. Of course, there's so many things I could talk about my time in Nuffield, but I wanted to talk about my key learning points. Of course, any hospital is a lot of work, but structuring and organizing a private one is, I think, even harder, even though it's smaller. Because it's smaller, so many of the so taken for granted facilities or communications aren't quite there. So they had to create their own ways of working. And this is, of course, a benefit because that means that they can choose and have that luxury of choice of making their own communication systems or making their own principles and rules alongside following NHS guidelines, which has meant that Nuffield Derby is one of the busiest and most profitable in the country. What I really liked between the teams that I observed was good communication and problem solving. Truly, not just clinical teams, but everyone involved in running the hospital was communicating efficiently with each other. If something went wrong in Department A, Department B was told, and it happened very quickly. I think that in the NHS, there is good communication and problem-solving skills, but I feel that it's slowed down, it's less efficient. So I do think that there could be a lot to learn from a place like Nuffield, which could be optimized in larger tertiary care centres. What I want to also talk about is there's this conception that a private patient gets gold dust from the doctor. It's not the case. The patient receives the same quality of care as they would have got from the consultant and the nursing team if they were on the NHS. As a medical practitioner or a healthcare professional, how we treat a person who comes to us cannot change. So there is not a special treatment reserved for those who pay money directly versus those who don't. Because at the end of the day, everyone's contributing in some way, whether it's taxes or national insurance, or they're paying up front, or their insurance company is. The quality of care cannot change. Of course, there are advantages in private, which I will now be exploring. From the patient aspect, choice, flexibility, and time are the key benefits of going private, from my opinion. In terms of choice, the patient has the ability to research and choose the consultant that they like for the reason. For example, if Mr. Abdul brought laparoscopic surgery into the region and he was operating at Nuffield, you might choose to have him perform your surgery. Or the other aspect of, in the NHS, of course, you'll meet the consultant, but sometimes it's the registrar who's actually operating under supervision of the consultant. So, as the patient, you might not necessarily be operated on by the person that you think. Of course, they're in charge of the operation, they're responsible, and they will be there in case anything goes wrong. However, the actual operation will be conducted by the most experienced person in the room. In terms of flexibility, of course, a lot of people work 9 to 5s or night shifts and have their own businesses. So the ability to be flexible with when you see your doctor is really important. There are perhaps evening or weekend clinics available for those who cannot make 9 to 5. There's quite an ease of rearranging. The bookings team is very apt at finding the next best time. Again, problem solving. And to me, this is a very good selling point. Often a patient will come in under, I don't know, point procedures X, but actually the consultant will talk to the patient, and because they have that time with that patient to spend 30 minutes with the patient, they will get to know that patient and their goals, and perhaps they can get procedure Y and Z done at the same time. And that's fantastic. As long as the insurance agrees for it, of course, then it makes it much easier. And in terms of time, because the consultants operating are far more experienced and are probably at the top of their department specialties, the operations happen a lot faster. So there is less time under general anesthesia. You bypass waiting lists, and of course, there's more attentive care because there's more staff to patient ratio in a place like Nuffield. So that can mean a little bit more attention from the staff, but not difference in quality, just a difference in quantity. One, to finish off the last minute or so, under Mr. Abdul, I had some fantastic discussions with him, and we discussed a lot about the quotes that he had, and unfortunately they're not seem to be presenting on this. I will try and read them out to you if I can. Approach to patient care is the same. Advantage of private healthcare is flexibility and the variety of options available. Treating everyday problems is as important as treating the super specialist extremes. Of course, one has to be a super specialist surgeon to be able to treat the super specialist, but it's nice to see that someone as experienced as Mr. Abdul is also willing to do the everyday problems and help out where he can. Ensure your practice is ethical. Maintain high standards and principles throughout. Don't perform things outside your remit. Ensure the patient has the safest and best experience possible. And lastly, to every single medical student out there wanting to explore private healthcare in the future and their careers, what is your USP? What do you bring to the table that's different to everybody else? And that's food for thought for myself as well. On that note, I'd like to thank you all for watching my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave any feedback or comments. My email is mzypm19@nottingham.ac.uk. Please feel free to email me with any questions and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your time. Best wishes.